So you can hop over there and join us. In the studio right now, we have Mr. PHILCOL Jeffers. He's the Communications and Marketing Officer within the Ministry of National Mobilization. All right. We're going to talk about gender based violence, domestic violence, what is in place within the government to help the situation. Everybody's calling on different arms. Everybody's saying, oh, this is not here, this is not in place. So we're going to deal with that this morning. A lot to learn, a lot to learn. If you have any questions, feel free to hit us up on the WhatsApp 4301043. After 8:30, then we'll be able to welcome the calls at 457-1043. All right, so good morning, Mr. Jeffers. Welcome back.
Thanks. It's nice being back with you. It's been a while.
Of course, well, of course, too nice being back with you. Been a while. Oh, my apologies. You know it is sometimes, but nevertheless, you're here. So maybe we should start with what are some of the causes? Where does gender-based violence come from?
Well, before we even get to that whole idea, we want to, on behalf of the Ministry of National Mobilization, state emphatically that we in no way, shape, form, fashion supports the violence that is happening in and around St. Vincent and the Grenadines at this time. And that, we would eventually be doing a series of information that denounces what is happening, and so that persons can look forward to those. We would have our minister, of course, leading the charge with those information to the general public here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It is not a situation of a reactive presentation, but also for person to understand that we have been proactive in our plight, that over the years we have always been on the forefront informing the nation of what has happened, where we are, and what is in place to assist with the issue of domestic violence and gender-based violence. Domestic violence is what we are familiar with in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in terms of terminologies. Gender-based violence basically takes into consideration man and woman. So gender, as it indicates, speaks to man, woman. And if we go international, we can say other. So that there are persons who do not identify as being man or woman, that category takes them into consideration also. So just to give a definition of what domestic violence is, as it is related to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it is an act that means any controlling or abusive behavior that harms the health, safety, or well-being of a person or any child, and includes, but is not limited to, the following: physical abuse or threats of physical abuse, sexual abuse or threats of sexual abuse, emotional, verbal, or psychological abuse, economic abuse, the avoidance of financial obligation owed to the applicant and the child or dependent of the respondent, including mortgage and rental obligations, intimidation, harassment, stalking, damage to or destruction of property, entry into an applicant's residence without consent, where the parties do not share the same residence. Now, based on what is transpiring in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, experience the term partners in an intimate relationship. In addition, violent acts committed against the mentally or physically challenged, the elderly, and children, or among siblings, are addressed in the Domestic Violence Act of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and these violence may include physical, sexual, emotional, verbal, psychological, or financial neglect and abandonment. So in a nutshell, it's anything that you do to somebody that is going to harm them is considered an act of violence. Now, in a gender-based situation, it is if it is done to a woman, or if it is done to a man, or the person who doesn't identify to be either. So we want to make that very clear. That is why the term gender-based is used. All right? As it relates to also in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there is no one piece of legislation that speaks to the entire process of gender-based violence. However, as I shared with you, the Domestic Violence Act of 2015, the Child Care and Adoption Act of 2011, these are designed to ensure the safety, health, and well-being of survivors and their family members It protects everyone, so it is women, men, children, and again, those who identify as other. And in all of that process, we are in the process right now in St. Vincent and the Grenadines of reforming some of our laws, especially the sexual offenses provision contained within the criminal codes and that discriminate against women, girls, and other vulnerable groups in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So it is not a situation that nothing is happening. I know that in the media we love to say that it's not fast enough. Also, based on what we were discussing earlier, in terms of the stringentness of the laws, the implication, the application of those, the fines, the sentencing, and so on. At times, we have to understand the language that is used in the sentencing is what determines the weight of what they come off with. Now, I'm no legal expert, all right? So I'm subject to correction where those are concerned. But from my understanding, having the discussions with the legal fraternities in our consultations in the general public, is that they're saying to us, these are the bits and pieces that are there. The criminal code covers certain things, but the Domestic Violence Act and the Child Abuse Protection Act also provides very specific responsibilities and roles to persons. So it goes from you, Crystal, being an on-air announcer. If you recognize something, you have a responsibility to go to the police or call us at the ministry or any of the safe spaces that are identified. A teacher, a neighbor, the person on the road, the common man on the road.
Can you stress the neighbor there?
Yeah, the neighbor. Because I tell you what happened, Crystal. Growing up as a child, we grew up in a neighborhood where everybody protects each other. Today, it is seen as commerce or somebody just being nosy, want to get into your business. But in the act, it would tell you, if you suspect or have an inclination that something is being perpetuated, you have a right to call the police. Let the police come and investigate. Now, I want to say, there are good and there are bad police officers. Because I know somebody's going to call and say, oh, the police don't respond and the police don't this and the police don't that. But what we have to understand, the police continue to be trained. And I can say that from
how often?
Our ministry standpoint. Before COVID, it used to be 2 or 3 times a year with us in terms of the Domestic Violence Act and Child Abuse Protection Act, so that they are aware and they know what happens. And these training took place from the top brass right down to the constables. So they and we went to different stations and locations and do this training. The higher focus happens when it is the 16 days of activism for gender-based, which is in November 25th to December 10th. There's a higher concentration of the training at that point in time. And on an average, we have between 150 to 250 police officers being trained in what their role and responsibilities are.
Those are like frontline officers.
Frontline officers, senior members within the ranks. We also have teachers. We also have healthcare providers who are part of the process. Because as you go through the act, you would see each person have a responsibility to play within that entire process. So if you go to the station and you identify that I am being abused, they are supposed to take you to get medically checked. They have to record your information. They must record your information. And one of the things that we say to the general public when we do these awareness campaigns, 1, make sure you ask the name and the badge number of the officer who's taking your information. So you ask, but why is that important? If you do not get a redress to your situation, you have no way to identify the officer and say, well, I went to officer 250 Crystal Oliver. If you don't know that, there is nothing that we can do to help address that situation. We cannot go to the commissioner of police or any member within the rank and said, okay, this client went to the police and they did not get any redress for their concern. They then ask, but who's the officer that took the information? What time did this person go? And so on. So you need to know that. And it is your right to ask for the badge number so that you keep that as your information to help with the process. All right? And so...
Right. So we actually have to stick a pin at this time, right?
Okay, no problem.
And continue when we come back at about 8:25, 8:30 thereabout, because we have quite a bit to touch on.
Yes.
Hopefully we can squeeze everything in there. And when we come back, you might have to repeat that point to the officers when they go. You record everything as much as possible. All All right, just in case some folks would have missed that. We're going to continue the discussion in just a bit. Coming up next is I almost thought it was 10 o'clock.
It's the Digital State of Emergency mix.
That's coming up now.
Hit us up on WhatsApp 430-1043.